Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Standalone, where we go from being ordinary to extraordinary. We are not about life just happening to us. We are about taking initiative, getting in touch with better information, and improving our lives. And so I only want to bring the best of the best into our presence. And today we have that. We have Gary Brecka with us today. You know, just in me prepping for our meeting today, Gary, I have fallen in love with what you do. You are a mortality researcher in the insurance industry, and you are so specialized in your skill that you could predict someone's death within 1 month. So that's a skill to possess. Right. And I want to dive into this today because we're talking about our health, but we're not talking about being normal. We're talking about being optimal today. And so I can't think of anyone else better than you. I want to start off our conversation about what kicked you from going into, moving from the insurance industry into the wellness industries to get a more hands-on approach to helping people versus kind of a data approach of this is what it is.
Right. Well, I mean, so in the mortality space, if we got 5 years of medical records on you and 5 years of demographic data, we could tell the insurance company how long you had to live to the month. And that seems extraordinary when you're talking about a 28-year-old that's perfectly healthy and has perfect blood work and never been to the doctor, rather than an 82-year-old that's terminally ill. And in broad strokes, the way that we did that was we looked at how well the body was managing oxygen. I have a saying that the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. And nothing could be more truthful than that statement. In fact, nothing is more impactful in terms of how many more years you have left on this earth, how many healthy years you have left in your health span, your lifespan, the depth of your delta wave of sleep, your waking energy, your cognitive function, your response to exercise, your libido, your emotional state, mood. All of these things depend directly on your oxidative state. In 22 years, we were not able to find a single disease etiological pathway, not one, that did not have its roots in a lack of blood oxygen, right? So all cancer begins in a hypoxic environment, and I'll touch on that in a few minutes. But sadly, even though I had access to a population database with hundreds of millions of lives and a tremendous amount of data, I could read the medical records. I could even look at blood tests, even order blood tests. I was not allowed to have any contact with the patient or any contact with the treating physician. So even if I saw life-threatening drug interactions, I couldn't contact the patient to warn them. And,
why is that, Gary? Why is that?
Well, I mean, initially, they put these laws in place so that people that were not licensed to practice medicine, like myself, would not get involved in the practice of medicine, or somebody that was submitting for a life insurance policy or an annuity wouldn't all of a sudden have the insurance company advising them on what they should do to achieve optimal health, or what they should do for their treatment for whatever condition they were facing. And so I understand that it was intentionally started with the right outcome in mind. But what really happened was, I would see misdiagnosis, contraindicated prescriptions. And as the years went on, I started to realize that the top 3 reasons that people were dying early and having an early onset of disease, early onset of pathology, was because of something called modifiable risk factors. Meaning, had I just been able to reach out and talk to the patient, I could have added on average 7 years to their life. And I knew this because I would do my own little research and say, what if I modified these 3 risk factors? What if I contacted the patient, let them know they had a clinical deficiency in vitamin D3, they didn't need corticosteroids, their hypertension could be treated with methylated vitamins, and the anemia wasn't responsive because they had a gene mutation, for example. And I was able to pull those out of their biome, fix those things in their biome, relatively easy to fix. I would see their life expectancy jump 7 years on average. And eventually I was not able to separate myself from the fact that there were human beings on the other side of these spreadsheets. For years, I just accepted that it was data, that I had no influence over it. I had nothing to do with their treatment. I didn't put them in this position. It wasn't my responsibility to get them out of this position. But eventually you start to realize that there's a human life on the other side of this spreadsheet. And I felt like I was just sitting behind a thick glass wall, just watching blind people walk into traffic. And, I realized in 2016, when Harvard published the data on life expectancy, that medical error was the third leading cause of death in the United States.
Mhm.
And, that's not a slight on modern medicine. It's just that we go to modern medicine as our place for optimal health, when really it's excellent at crisis and crisis care, but not so good at teaching people how to live healthier, happier, longer, more fulfilling, optimal lives. And I had a very specific case that where I spotted a conflicting drug interaction. I wanted to contact the patient. I actually was threatened with prosecution.
Wow.
And so I penned my resignation and 7 years ago and started a wellness franchise. At the time, it was called Streamline Wellness. I started to treat a very well-known billionaire named Grant Cardone, made a material difference in his life. I mean, if you know who Grant Cardone is, he certainly no longer looks, acts, or performs like a 64-year-old man.
Right.
And he acquired us in September of last year, and now we're in the process of getting the message out to the world. And we discovered
you're going to scale. We know you're going to grow, because when you're in the presence of the Cardones, it's like, it's the greatest form of business. It's about like making the world better, contributing through positive information and doing it big. So I love that.
Oh my gosh. I mean, the capacity for this organization to scale my business has just been mind numbing. We were acquired in September of last year. We're already almost 20 times more monthly revenue than we did the day that we were acquired. But that really represents to me the number of lives that we're touching, the platform we're using to get the message out. So our plan is to have 1,000 of these physical locations across the country, so we can bring the cost down, so that every human being has access to modalities like superhuman protocol, which I can talk about, which, will empower the body to a better energetic state, testing for deficiency in the human body. Because one of the things that we realized in the mortality space was that disease and pathology as we know it today, and the absence of optimal function, are not really things that are happening to us. They're things that are happening within us.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a single compound known to mankind, not one, that enters the human body that's used in the format that we put it in. Everything that enters the human body is converted through a process called methylation into its usable form. So, for example, I always use the example that we pull crude oil out of the ground, but you can't put crude oil into your gas tank, right? Because the car doesn't understand that fuel source. Crude oil has to be refined into gasoline, and now the car can run. Human beings are no different. We put raw materials into the human body: vitamins, amino acids, minerals, nutrients, carbohydrates, fats. In a human being, this process is called methylation. So we put all of these compounds into the human body: carbohydrates, fats, proteins, minerals, amino acids, and then the body converts them into its usable form, and now it understands that fuel source. If you can't make this conversion, you have a deficiency. When you have a deficiency, it leads to pathology and disease. For example, how many of your listeners have heard that hypothyroid runs in families, hypertension runs in families, depression, anxiety, ADD, ADHD, OCD, manic depression, bipolar, even addiction runs in families. So we call these disorders genetic. But yet we've mapped the entire human genome, and there's not a physician alive that can tell you what gene causes those diseases. And if it's not on a gene, then it's not genetic. So why do these diseases run in families? Why does hypertension run in families? Why does depression run in families? Why does alcoholism or drug addiction, and why does hypothyroid run in families, or anxiety? It's because the body, you're inheriting an inability to refine a raw material, and that deficiency leads to those conditions. If we replace that raw material, and I'm talking about things as simple as amino acids, B vitamins, zinc, magnesium, methionine, SAMe, when you replace these raw materials, then that disease or pathology eviscerates. I'll give you a perfect example. 44% of this country is either currently on or has taken an antidepressant, right? So 44% of Americans have been on an antidepressant at some point in their lifetime. And we define depression as an inadequate supply of serotonin. So if you're low on the neurotransmitter serotonin, you're by definition depressed. But you would think if the definition is a depleted serotonin, that the fix would be to raise serotonin. But that's not what we do. We take people that are depressed, we put them on SSRIs, serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And what these do is they ration what little serotonin these people have. So by definition, it never raises serotonin. So by definition, it never ends depression. That's why I have hundreds and hundreds of patients that have walked into the clinic, and I always ask them, how long have you been on an antidepressant? And sometimes they'll say 15 or 18 years. And I go, well, when did you think it was going to kick in? And so if we understand that serotonin is methylated, it's refined in the gut. 90% of that neurotransmitter in the body is in the gut. If you don't have it here, you can't have it here. So to fix these conditions, we fix the gut. We turn methylation back on in the gut, and then we have the serotonin that rises to the brain, and you see that these mood imbalances return to normal. The right neurotransmitter for healthy mood and emotions, having the right amino acids for deep sleep and quieting the mind, having the right B complexes so that we don't develop hypothyroid or hypertensive states. And so we have clear, clean waking energy, clear cognitive function.
Yeah. So, first, one thing that I want to do is I want to talk a little bit more deeply about methylation, because often, what people don't understand is that our bodies are amazing, and there's these processes inside of us that they are designed to work for us. But at the same time, like, we abuse our bodies, we overdo things, and then, it can turn around and create a negative effect. So I love what you say, where what's happening to us is actually happening within us. This is a powerful, powerful statement. And I wanted to get into methylation and tie it into, genetics, because I have always loved epigenetics. I've been obsessed with epigenetics, and I learned about methylation when I started to understand this, because people, we tend to blame our genes, but that's not, our genes are not us. It's the expression of us.
Yes.
So could you just quickly explain what is methylation, and why is this such an important process in our body to optimize our health?
Yeah, the best explanation I have of methylation is it's the process that the human body goes through to take every raw material that enters the human body, right? Every protein, fat, mineral, carbohydrate, amino acid, nutrient, vitamin, everything that enters the human body, and convert it to its usable form. So methylation is arguably the most important process that human beings go through from a physiological standpoint. And so methylation is something that we can look at. We can actually test to see how well a person is methylating. There are 5 major actionable genes that control this process in the human body. And
is that what you test for?
And we test for those. Yep, it's a test
great.
you do once in your lifetime. It's a $600 test. You do it once in your life, and you will never, for the balance of your lifetime, ever guess what your body is deficient in or what you need to supplement with. You see, most of us are supplementing just for the sake of supplementing. We're taking a multivitamin hoping that it fills the void, or we're taking saw palmetto or CoQ10 or turmeric or curcumin or any number of other things that we read about in a magazine or heard about from our spouse or our neighbor, or we're advised to take, but we haven't asked the important question of our body, right? We haven't actually gone into our own biome and asked our body, hey, what can I do for you? What are you deficient in? What could I provide to you to make your job easier? And every human being is different. Right? I mean, one of the biggest fallacies in modern medicine is that what goes into my body is used in the exact same format that goes into your body and to all of your listeners, right? I mean, the process of methylation is unique to each individual, even though the genes are the same. The breaks are different in each person. And so when you look at these actionable genes, meaning while I can't fix the gene, I can supplement for its function, and you see that you have a genetic break. Now, you have a gene that doesn't work. Now, the question is, what does that gene do? Well, let's take the most common gene mutation in the world. It's called MTHFR. A lot of people have heard of this gene mutation. I won't tell you what the nickname is for this gene mutation. And that might not sound like a big deal until you realize that folic acid is the most prevalent nutrient in the human body. It's the most prevalent nutrient in the human diet. Our entire grain supply is sprayed with folic acid. All white rice, white flour, white pasta, white bread is sprayed with the chemical folic acid. Now, you've heard of folic acid, and we think that it's a chemical that occurs naturally in nature, but it's not. You cannot find folic acid anywhere on the surface of the earth. In 1993, when the US federal government decided to spray our entire grain supply and all of white flour, white pasta, white breads, white rice with folic acid, you saw corresponding skyrocketing in ADD, ADHD, OCD, autism, manic depression, bipolar, and schizophrenia. And the reason for this is that 44% of the population has a gene mutation that doesn't allow them to convert folic acid. So what happens, for example, to a pregnant female? When she gets pregnant and her OBGYN says, take a prenatal vitamin that has 1,400% of the daily allowance of folic acid. If she has the gene mutation, MTHFR, which 44% of the population has, she will immediately go nuts, right? And this is where postpartum depression comes from in 85% of the cases. And then what happens is she saturates her body with folic acid. She gets postpartum depression. Eventually, the pregnancy ends. And so she stops taking the prenatal vitamin and the symptoms go away. So she blames it on the pregnancy, not on the vitamin. In children, if you look at the back of your food labels, we don't say sprayed with folic acid. We call it fortified or enriched. So fortified or enriched foods are sprayed with the chemical folic acid. 44% of the population has a gene mutation that doesn't allow them to process folic acid. So in 44% of the population, you get aberrant behavioral outcomes from high intakes of folic acid. So take a child, 6-year-old kid that's getting ready for school, and he has this gene mutation or she has this gene mutation. What do we feed them in the morning? White bagels, Pop-Tarts, cereal, orange juice. So now you flood their body with folic acid and you wonder why it's a full contact sport to get this kid in the car to go to school. And then the call comes home from school saying, hey, little Johnny can't pay attention. He's disruptive. He doesn't follow directions. He doesn't complete his assignments. You need to bring in the Ritalin in order to fix this, right? So what happens when you can't break compounds down in the human body is they rise. When they rise, they excite the nervous system. They can also excite the mind. So their little minds are racing. So modern medicine says if the mind is racing, let's put an amphetamine into the body, race the central nervous system to match the pace of the mind, instead of pulling folic acid out of the diet, supplementing with methylfolate that they're deficient in, and allowing the mind to naturally quiet. So depending on what gene break you have these conditions that haunt you that you spend a lifetime in search of. Like, for example, most of the patients that I speak to that have gut issues, that think they have an allergy, they say, Gary, I get intermittent gas or bloating, diarrhea, constipation, irritability, cramping. And I said, well, what are you allergic to? And they'll give me a laundry list of things. Well, I'm allergic to wheat, soy, corn, dairy, blueberries, and bananas. Go, okay, let's stop right there. That's all 9 of the essential amino acids. You'd be dead if you actually had those allergies. So what is it? Well, there's a gene that causes the gut to methylate certain vitamins, and it controls the speed of the gut. And what we don't understand is that this pace of the gut is actually more important than its contents. So when we ingest certain foods, regardless of what they are, if you have this gene mutation and you're not supplementing for its deficiency, your gut does not move at the right speed. And when you change the speed of the conveyor belt that we call the intestinal tract, you get all kinds of dysfunction. And we try to associate it with what we last ate, but we can't truly correlate it. People say, well, I'm allergic to corn. And my first question is, well, can you ever eat corn and not have a reaction? They go, well, yeah, sometimes I can eat corn and I don't blow up like a tick. Okay, well, then you're not allergic to corn, right? Allergies are not transient. They're consistent, right? What's not consistent is when you have a gene break and a deficiency in a raw material, usually the B complex of vitamins, and your gut's not moving at the right speed. When you put the right raw material back into the human body, the material it can't convert, then these gut issues go away. Same thing as with ADD and ADHD, OCD. Most of your listeners right now that have poor sleep patterns, if I were to ask them the following questions, you'd find that their sleep issues are coming from methylation, right? So what will happen if you have an issue with methylation is you'll lay down to go to sleep, right? And your body is tired, but your mind keeps you awake, right? So as your environment quiets, your mind wakes up. Because remember, the human brain doesn't just create thought, we also dismantle thought. And if we don't degrade thought at the same rate that we create it, the mind gets very clouded. And this is what we call attention deficit disorder, which is not attention deficit at all. It's actually an attention overload disorder. It's too many windows open at the same time. It's not that we lack the ability to pay attention. It's that we lack the ability to pay attention to so many things. If you put the right amino acid balance back into the bloodstream, specifically L-methionine, you'll find that the mind quiets as fast as it creates thought. And this creates balance. So when you have this certain gene mutation called COMT, and you lay down to go to sleep, your mind wakes up and you just lay in bed thinking about the most innocuous little thoughts. Like when you talk to these people that have poor sleep patterns, you go, well, what are you thinking about at night? They will tell you, I'm just thinking about the most innocuous little stuff like, did my belt match my shoes today? Did I return that Instagram post? Did I get everything on my grocery list? And these are not the kind of thoughts that should be keeping you up at night, but they do night after night after night, or they fall asleep and their mind wakes them up thinking about the most innocuous little things. This isn't an issue in the mind. This is a deficiency in simple raw materials. When you put these back into the human body, the mind begins to quiet, deep sleep returns.
Yeah. So
I feel like I went on a little bit of a tangent there. Sorry.
It's all connected. And, I wanted to ask you this question. What do you feel is the role in meditation? So when you're saying quieting the mind, part of it's chemical, is part of it spiritual? What are your takes on that? Because I know when you get into this data world, you get into this thing, well, what is the raw data? What is the chemical? But do you also feel like there's also a spiritual component to it also, that maybe if we can clean up chemically, then our spiritual work can be more effective? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I totally agree with that. But most of the practice of meditation, of mindset, of gratitude, of journaling, of self-help, motivation, these are mechanisms for coping with the deficiency. So in other words, we have this anchor we're dragging off of our stern. Meditation and mindset and journaling and self-help and motivation are adding power to the engine so that we can overpower this anchor that we're dragging. If we added to that fixing our physiology, it would be like pulling the anchor up off the bottom of the ocean, right? So in other words, I'm a huge believer in meditation, mindset. I mean, I've got a PMF mat behind me. I've got cold plunges outside. I've got a hypermax oxygen upstairs. So I'm a huge believer in meditation, mindset. In fact, I'm doing a documentary with Joe Dispenza right now, which will air Q1 next year, and Dr. Bruce Lipton. And we're converging science and spirituality in a very new way. That allows human beings to harness their absolute optimal state. But if I lack the raw material in the human body to manufacture healthy mood, then I can fight that with my own stubborn willpower, and I can add meditation and journaling and gratitude and routine and self-help and motivation, and to help me get past that, to overpower that deficiency. But what if I also supplemented for that deficiency and then use the power of meditation to reach the next level, not just to return myself to a state of normalcy, right? Because most of us, like I said, are walking around at about 55 or 60%, and only because we don't know what's missing in our body, right? So diet has a huge impact. If you look at the natural ingredients that are found in good whole foods, you'll find they're flush with folate, natural B vitamins. When we look at the supplement world, we're flush with chemicals like folic acid and synthetic forms of B12 like cyanocobalamin, which is actually a cyanide-based form of B12. In the United States, we're actually able to use micro doses of toxins because we use something called single dose toxicity to determine whether or not something is safe for the population. This is why you can accumulate mercury poisoning. You can accumulate other types of poison in the body. But so I believe that the first step is to find out what is my body deficient in. Replace that raw material. If it's a B vitamin, the specific form of B vitamin, if it's an amino acid, if it's a B complex, if it's light metals like zinc, magnesium, and B12, put those raw materials back into the human body through supplementation. And then watch how the power of meditation will harness an optimal state. You really can reach an entirely different level when you're not using meditation to overpower a deficiency, but you're using it as something that is pushing you rather than something that you're dragging. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I think people, because we always think about this in this society, sometimes people are like, no, it's not that, it's this, and no, it's not that, it's this. And I'm just like, I think there might be a combination. And if we can get both of those things working for us, it might be to our benefit.
Yeah, there's no question. Like if you were to ask me, Gary, what is a mood? What is an emotional state? It is nothing more than a collection of neurotransmitters with oxygen. And when you say, well, what is happiness? Okay, well, that's so much dopamine, so much serotonin, so much norepinephrine, so much epinephrine, boom, you have the emotion happiness. What if I pull one neurotransmitter out of that recipe? It would be like going to a bakery chef and saying, you can bake whatever you want, you just can't use butter, right? It doesn't sound like a big deal. It's only one ingredient. But you pull butter out of a baking recipe and just think of how many recipes it would affect. Cookies, pastries, brownies, pies, what have you. Human beings are no different. You deplete a raw material. Now, anything that requires that raw material as a part of its recipe, you can't assemble. And so if you're not able to assemble healthy mood because you are not manufacturing neurotransmitters because methylation is broken, now you're trying to overpower that with mindset and meditation and gratitude and vision and intention setting and meditation and visualization and all of these things that you're using to overpower a physiologic condition. What if we could get rid of that physiologic deficit? And now you'd use meditation as an empowerment tool to really propel yourself. And so this is true in conditions like anxiety. I have hundreds and hundreds of people I speak to all across the country, thousands actually, that are either plagued by anxiety or know somebody that's plagued by anxiety. If you know someone who's affected by anxiety and you ask them these three questions, you can prove that their anxiety is coming from a deficiency and not from their outside environment. So the first question you ask them is, have you had this anxiety on and off throughout your entire lifetime? They will almost always say yes. The second question is, can you point to the specific trigger that causes it? And the majority of the time they will say no. I can just wake up in the morning overwhelmed with anxiety. I can be driving home from work on an otherwise innocuous day, and I can just be overwhelmed with anxiety. So, and the third question is, if you've tried anti-anxiety medication, they will say no, it just made me feel like a zombie, right? It just sort of zoned me out. And I felt like I was stoned or just drugged, and I was very melancholy. So this is a sign that this is not coming from a cluster of symptoms outside of the body. It's coming from your physiology. It's coming from a deficiency in raw materials that, if replaced, that condition would completely eviscerate. And so imagine if you could just pull anxiety, mood numbness, mild depression, poor cognitive function, poor waking energy, lack of deep sleep, lack of motivation, poor aberrant mood. If you could just pull those things, you could just pull all those anchors up off the ground. Just imagine how they would flourish in every aspect of their life, career, their love life, their self-esteem. kids, their relationship with their spouse. I mean, would touch every aspect of their life.
It would. What do you specifically test for? You talk a lot about biomarkers. So what is a biomarker? And when you run these tests, which I'm going to definitely do, how and what are you testing for? And then what do you use that information to then supplement to a person to have a greater effect on them?
So test that I think just every human being should do once in their life, because it's a gene test, so you never need to repeat this test, is test for the major markers of methylation, right? You can do it with us, you can do it with other companies. We do it through Cell Science Laboratories at 10X. It's a $600 test. You do it once in your life. It will tell you exactly what raw materials your body can convert and what raw materials it can't. And then you supplement just for that deficiency. I'm a huge believer in supplementing for deficiency, not just for the sake of supplementing, right? Just throwing a bunch of stuff in and hoping that it works. So the first test that I would really recommend that everyone get is it's called a genetic methylation test, methyl detox test. It's a cheek swab. You can order it online. They send it to you in the mail. You swab your cheek with a Q-tip. You put it back in this test tube. It goes to the lab. And when the results come back, you know exactly what you're deficient in. You can supplement for that deficiency and then just watch the magic happen, because it's astounding what happens to the human body when you just give it the raw material it needs to do its job. We also do an in-depth blood test. I look at 64 biomarkers in the blood. Because you can see when you fix the genetic deficiency, you actually see the blood correct, right? So I'll give you a perfect example. Lots of people that have anemia or poor hormone balance. One of the treatments for anemia, low red blood cell count, is folic acid, B12, and iron. Well, what if you can't process folic acid? Now, folic acid is doing nothing for you. So this condition becomes chronic. If you switch the folic acid to methylfolate, you'd see the blood correct. And everything that a human being perceives about energy is nothing more than oxygen in your blood. If you said to me, Gary, I had a lot of energy today, physiologically, what you're saying is I had a lot of oxygen in my blood today. So if oxygen equals energy, which it does, then if I want to raise your energy level, improve your cognitive function, and deepen your sleep, I need to raise the amount of oxygen your blood transports. And the way that we do that is by fixing methylation and balancing hormones. So when we look at the 64 biomarkers in the blood, these are markers that change. You only look once at genetic markers because they never change. So if we get a hold of those 5 genetic markers and those 64 biomarkers in your blood, we can turn you into a superhero.
Wow, that's great. I wanted to ask you, with 5G, I was recently in Europe and they don't have 5G there. And, we have it here. If you could explain, what is a PEMF mat? What does it do? Why is that important? If you could talk a little bit about grounding, does 10X Health also teach and, get a person more grounded so they're in an optimal state? And then what does 5G do to us on a cellular level?
Yeah, I'll talk about 5G in a second, but the final shoe has definitely not dropped on 5G. I mean, this has a massive interruption in cellular communication. Things are just a giant ball of frequency, right? If you ever want to read a really interesting study, there's one called the Spain scale of emotion, where they isolated frequencies leaving the human being's body. And in doing so, they found that the most powerful frequency to leave a human's body is the frequency of authenticity. When someone's words are truthful and they believe what they're saying, they emanate a very strong frequency that is very attractive. If you believe in the universal law of attraction, which I do. And if you don't, you should look up the law in physics called constructive interference. It will actually explain the law of attraction from an actual physical perspective. It's as valid as the law of gravity. But what's happened as we become more industrialized is we've just gotten further and further away from Mother Nature, right? We get 3 things from Mother Nature. We get magnetism, we get oxygen, and we get light. right? We get magnetism from the earth, we get oxygen from the air, and we get light from the sun. And so a PEMF mat, pulse electromagnetic field, mimics the current that we get from the earth. I'll show you one right here. I'm in my mountain cabin in Colorado, but that little yoga mat looking thing right there, that is a PEMF mat. So what this does is it simulates grounding or earthing, right? Think about the last time you had bare feet touching raw soil on the earth. I'm not talking about walking on pavement or tile or walking around your house with no shoes on. I'm talking about touching grass or dirt or sand or soil, right? Because human beings build up a charge. When we walk on the surface of the earth without shoes on, we discharge into the earth. We always talk about becoming more and more alkaline, right? Less acidic, more alkaline. Well, alkalinity is a charge, right? Mm-hmm. pH stands for potential hydrogen. It's a charge. It's a complete fallacy that you can get alkaline by drinking alkaline water, right? You cannot take the properties of alkaline water, transfer those properties to the blood, and expect those properties to still be in the alkaline water. In other words, if I had, I don't know, this bottle full of salt water, and I have another bottle that has no salt water, no salt, and I take the salt from this bottle and put it in this one, well, it can't be here and here at the same time, right? So what makes us alkaline is low Gauss current. What makes us alkaline is a charge. So in 16 minutes, you can lay on a PEMF mat and you can alkalize all 32 trillion cells in the human body. So one of the biggest things we can do is get one of these PEMF mats, slip it into your bed, set it to come off in the morning before you even wake up. And every morning that you wake up, you'll wake up in an alkaline state. And if you actually look what's happening at a cellular level, you can actually see your red blood cells go from being sticky and all clumped up to separating and free floating around the bloodstream, ready to accept oxygen. So it's a very, very healthy way to take one of the best things from Mother Nature, magnetism, and bring it into your home. And once you put that thing in your bed, you can do a setting and you can wake up every morning alkaline. I'm a huge believer in red light therapy and cold plunges. I have a cattle trough outside that I fill with 48 degree spring water. And I get in there when I'm up here in the mountains. But if you want to go to a really interesting website, write this down. Mm-hmm. It's called antennasearch.com. Antennasearch.com. In fact, if you want to screen share and go there right now, I'll show you something really fascinating about this website. All of your listeners can go to this website. You can put in your zip code and you can see in real time how many 5G towers are close enough to actually have cellular interference with your body. So if you put in your zip code into antennasearch.com, it will show you the location of the towers and it will show you how much 5G your body's being bombarded with. If you're in an area with high 5G interference, you have to get a PEMF mat. You don't have a choice. I mean, because if you think about how do cells communicate, how nerves communicate, we are just a giant ball of frequency, right? Mm-hmm. We are a giant ball of charge. When the surface of a cell has similar charges to the surface of another cell, the cells don't touch, like two poles of a magnet, right? Two north poles of a magnet. What happens if you flip the south pole of a magnet to the north pole of a magnet? They attract. Mm-hmm. So 5G interrupts the cellular charge on the surface of your cell. If you change the cellular charge, you cause cells to attract that normally should not attract, right? You don't want your red blood cells clumping up, right? You want all that surface area available for oxygen transfer, for waste elimination, for detoxification, for repair, for regeneration. You don't want cells to look like a bunch of cars trying to take the same exit off of a highway. So if you go to antennasearch.com, put in your zip code, hit enter, it will actually show you the location, the amount, and it will only give you the towers that interrupt cellular frequency. Some of us, like I live in Miami, right in downtown, part of the year. That's why I try to come to the mountains when I can. But I live in Miami part of the year. And when I put in my 1000 Biscayne Boulevard address, man, I'm like, radiation chamber,
wow.
All this 5G. So I use PMF to blow that frequency out of the body.
Yeah, I think this is so powerful. Gary, I believe that information has the potential to change, change our lives, change systems. And it's your ability to extract the information is almost like what the body does. It takes this raw material, and that's what you're doing. You're taking this information and you're making it be usable to us so that we can be better. And I can't think of any greater work. So I'm glad that you made that decision. I'm
Well,
glad
thank
that you have all those years of expertise, but now you're in this space of making people better. I can't commend you more. That's a major contribution to this world that you're making. So I
Well,
just
that's really
say
kind of you.
thank you for your time. I will be in touch with you because I want to be more superhuman.
Yeah, who wants to be a superhuman?
I want to take it to the next level. And I'm excited to align myself with people as great as you are. So thank you for your
Thank
time
you.
today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for the kind words, and to your optimal health.
Yes. And where can people find you to learn more, to get these tests done? Because information changes things. Let's get the right information about ourselves.
One of the best places is on my Instagram, just at Gary, Gary Brecka, Brecka. All I do is teach on Instagram. So you'll find all kinds of informational videos on anxiety, on depression, on optimal health, on clear function, on deep sleep, on waking energy, on response to exercise, all of the buzz things that people are really in search of. And I put statistically valid information there, and I give you simple tools that you can do that you don't have to buy a bunch of stuff in order to accomplish, so you can live a more optimal life. Little tiny shifts in our daily routine make magnanimous impacts over a lifetime. Some of the deficiencies that we have, as simple as vitamin D3, chronically over a lifetime, lead to conditions that look like rheumatoid arthritis and other things. So a lot of the information on there, I think your listeners would find very helpful. If you want to do the test, you can get it right off of my Instagram. Like I said, you don't have to use ours. There's a lot of good testing facilities out there, but the test is available on my Instagram, but more importantly, a lot more educational videos are there.
Love it. Thank you so much for your time today.
Super welcome. Thank you for your time today too. We'll talk soon. Okay.